Hello my fellow kin, welcome back to the channel and welcome to a very surprise video. To no one's surprise, because the data slate did indeed drop today on April 25th. On today's agenda, we'll be taking a quick look at the data slate changes and make some discussions on the points. So the first thing you'll notice here on the screen is that there's two things that are green and nothing that's red. Generally, that's a great thing because that means nothing got nerfed and two things got buffed, which is awesome. They got points drops. And the two things that did get points drops are the Hearthkin Warriors and Votann the Destined, which basically means one thing got points drops, being the Warriors. So the Warriors came down 10 points total since the last data slate, where they did not get any changes at all, and I had actually expected them to come down 10 points as I made in that previous video. I was hoping they would come down to compensate for the Sagittar going up a little bit, going up 15 points at that time, because I felt like you needed a little bit more incentive to bring these Warriors versus just taking them to actually fill a seat inside of the transport. With the Warriors coming down 10 points, I am happy to say that I am completely satisfied with the value of every single unit here, except maybe Votann, but at that point he can't really go any lower unless they just rewrite his rules altogether, which, maybe they will. Minus 10 points on the Warriors isn't too crazy of a change. I know it probably won't affect that many people, but I do think it's nice because it allows in many cases for you to squeeze in that extra enhancement. In my case, Appraising Glare, which I really wanted to take in my list, but simply couldn't fit it because the Warriors were there taking up an extra 10 spots. At this point, I could fit it in without making any other changes to my list, which is great. I also think this creates a new interesting dynamic between choosing Hearthkin Warriors or Berserks to fit inside of your transports. At 100 points each, you now have the option to decide fairly between taking a utility option, being the Hearthkin Warriors, or the Chthonian Berserks, who come in at 100 points as a damage dealer. This also means you get to fill your Sagittars with Warriors for just 50 points, which is great. In a lot of ways, this essentially means the Sagittars only took a 10% increase from last data slate because now you've balanced that out with something tentatively that goes inside, dropping 5. I also think this might mean we might see a resurgence in some of the Sagittar spam archetypes, which I think I've noticed a slight deviation away from in recent lists. Hopefully we still maintain that diversity. Now the next change here is Votann the Destined. So Votann came down another 10 points in this data slate, and I still don't think it quite pushes him into viability, but the points drop certainly helps. Now the biggest problem with Votann is that he doesn't really do all that much. He could be taken as a beat stick in quotation marks, but he isn't that impactful. You can't swap one of his dice rolls to a 6, making you automatically have devastating wounds for 2 damage, but it's just 2 damage. Sure, it might come in handy, but is it all that impactful? I'm not sure. What I think this guy needs instead of a points drop is, well, a points drop, but also a slight rules rework to make him a little bit more comparable to some of his other options. When you think about it, Votann is supposed to fill the gap between a Cal and a champion, balancing out the damage and the utility provided by both. I think he falls flat in both of these regards because the Iron Ear champion has significantly more of a punch when he connects in combat with his Mass Hammer, and he also has access to mortal wounds on a charge, which on average do as much as that one round of combat with Votann, who changes one of his wound rolls to a 6 for devs. He also falls flat in utility because he doesn't provide any lethal hits to his unit, whereas the Cal for 10 points less provides this amplification of damage, which I think overpowers the ability to reliably pump out devastating wounds with Votann every turn. That said, I could potentially see a world where people take Votann inside of Sagittar spam lists, because yes, he is 80 points now, which means he's cheaper than committing 100 points to Warriors, even though you would split the Warriors in theory, and that also means you potentially have access to a beat stick in quotation marks who pops out of a transport and is available to do damage, while also being quite resilient in return because he reduces all damage down to 1. So this could be interesting. I don't know if anyone's going to do it, but I'd like to see people try. I just want to make a quick note that I'm surprised the Hearthkin Pioneers didn't take any points hits. I was expecting them to go up to either 95 or 100. I still think at that point you would take them anyway because they're so pivotal to the movement and mobility of the list. I know in Europe we've been seeing a trend of taking 6-man bikes, and they have been quite devastating in some of these events. So I was also surprised to see the 6-man, at the very least the 6-man, not take a hit. But hopefully they remain around this points level and don't become too problematic in the competitive scene. Now to wrap the video up, I just want to say that I know a lot of other factions ate dirt on this data slate, and for the ones that did get points drops, players might be feeling like GW doesn't quite understand what their factions need. But I actually think GW did a pretty solid job with Votann since our initial changes at the beginning of the edition, and I'm honestly pretty happy with the direction and the balance we're seeing for the army. Ultimately, we're a relatively new faction and have a pretty small model range, but that hasn't stopped us from having so many diverse and viable archetypes out there in the competitive scene. So I'm really excited to have the faction in its current state and see what new lists await us with these small changes. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.